Hello and welcome to Just Onside. I'm your host for today's episode, Uwais Ahmed. And as you can see, I'm dressed appropriately to commemorate the passing of Leeds United Football Club, from the Premier League at least. I'm joined by a guest who clearly doesn't meet that etiquette of dress code. A bit of defiance there from you, Ayub, dressed in Leeds yellow and blue.
Down but not out.
I was just
It
thinking,
was the plan. The plan was. I mean, we talked offline, but the plan was that we'd obviously miraculously survive, and this would be some form of celebration. But obviously, it's not worked out that way. But to me, Leeds forever.
Leeds forever. I like it. I like the defiant outlook. Where was this in the last few weeks when you were kind of downbeat and talking about how everything's gone wrong and you could see this coming for years?
I didn't want to tempt fate. I really should have done. Really, I should have done, shouldn't I? But it is what it is.
There are some things perhaps even beyond tempting fate. Anyway, we will get into that shortly. Just before we dive into our topics for today, mainly centered around the final game week of the Premier League campaign. Give just before we start, give the if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Give the episode a like, comment down below. What's your thoughts on the final game week of the season, and press that bell notification to be notified of future content. Just before we dive in, Ayub, normally we'd be joined by Badge. Badge is attending to a few personal matters. Hopefully, he should be with us on the next episode. We need him on the next episode. We've got Manchester City against Manchester United to preview the Manchester Derby in the FA Cup, which is played on Saturday at 3 p.m. at Wembley. Should be an absolute cracker. So we absolutely need to get his thoughts on his club's attempts at a second trophy this season. They've obviously solidified third. We may touch on that later. But yeah, let's get Badge on the next episode. Be happy to hear his views about how he sees his team's hopes for Saturday. There's only one place to start, though. There is, unfortunately,
At the bottom.
At the bottom. Perhaps
that's where it ends for me.
Yeah, I was going to say perhaps for one final time as well. So Sunday, the Premier League fixture schedule came to an end. Game week 38. The main kind of attention centered around obviously which two teams were going to get relegated out of Everton, Leeds, and Leicester. Going into the final game of the season, Everton were in, I guess, the box seat, being outside of the relegation zone before the games kicked off. Obviously, Everton won their game at home to Bournemouth, a narrow 1-0 win. Leicester also won. Leeds unfortunately lost at home to Spurs. I'm going to give you the floor, Ayub. What's your initial thoughts in terms of obviously Leeds having their relegation confirmed, but also obviously Leicester joining them after only a handful of years after winning the Premier League title?
In terms of final day relegation scraps, it went to script, to be honest, really. I mean, I expected the results to pan out as they did. Everton, I expected them to win. Leicester, I expected them to win. Leeds, I weren't too sure. I mean, I said, I think I said that they might win, but really that was a moment of insanity. They were never going to win. But in terms of how this sort of afternoon played out, in a bizarre sort of way, in a perverse sort of way, I was quite happy that Leeds conceded very early on, because I think the last thing I wanted was some sort of excruciating anguish, almost some false hope. In a sense, when that goal went in, that was it. If there was a glimmer of hope that was extinguished. And also with the other games, I mean, normally there's some sort of drama. It was very much an anticlimax, and I always felt it would be an anticlimax. I just didn't see the opposition that Leicester and Everton had, that they would be putting up a real fight, because Bournemouth, they're on the beach. Same with West Ham. West Ham have got a massive game coming up, so I really didn't expect them to put up a real fight, and it turned out to be that they didn't put up a fight. So a very anticlimactic. The results were as I predicted. I mean, I suppose when you reflect on it, that Leicester going down, I mean, that probably is the most surprising. I think Leeds going down shouldn't be a surprise because we were there last season as well, last game of the season. So in a sense, it shouldn't be a surprise. But Leicester going down, I still think that probably is for me the biggest surprise in terms of the teams at the bottom. I certainly wouldn't think or didn't consider them to be the third word or part of the three-word worst sides. And I've said this before: if you've got a team, Jamie Vardy, albeit he's obviously getting on a bit, Harvey Barnes, Tielemans, James Maddison. I mean, those four really are. There's enough quality there that they should never be in that position. I mean, maybe mid-table, fair enough, but to be in the bottom three, plus also they had Brendan Rodgers at the start of the season, or at least a large part of the season. So that's the biggest shock. That's the biggest surprise. And I think Leicester fans, more than Leeds fans, probably will be devastated. Me as a fan, we sort of skirted with relegation last season, so I knew that maybe this season was going to be similar. So ultimately, it's not a surprise. Devastating, yes, but it's not a surprise. In terms of our performance, I'll probably just like briefly talk. And I don't want to talk too much because, to be honest, there's nothing worth talking about. I mean, that was symptomatic of the season that we've had. It was rubbish. I mean, to concede at 2 minutes, I mean, I think it was 90 seconds. That absolutely epitomized how weak and fragile we have been, how ineffective the players have been. And I think at the start of the game, I looked at the selection. We had 6 defenders in a must-win game, and even then, obviously, it wouldn't have sort of mattered if the other teams won. But in a must-win game, or at least that's what we really should have been doing, he plays 6 defenders. So I think a fitting, pathetic end to a rather pathetic season. So from my part, I'm almost quite relaxed now because it was a long time coming. I think now the realization, it's not a realize. I mean, it's an acceptance that we are in the Championship. So really, it's just looking forward to the Championship. I think there's a lot of things that need to be sorted out at Leeds at this moment in time. But really, I knew deep down that it was always going to be the Championship. So gutted, disappointed, surprised? No, not surprised at all.
I was going to suggest that there's quite a few variations of the different stages of grief, and I'm just wondering whereabouts you are at the moment. But it seems
I think
like
I went through all 5 in that first 90 seconds.
I think the thing with Leeds' demise was that it was kind of a slow trickle, so you kind of already made a bit of a head start on your grief, I think, probably from game week 31, 32 onwards. Yeah, I think you've summarized it really well in terms of the happenings of the final game of the season. I think from a Leeds perspective, if you look at firstly just the form, 2 draws in the last 9 games, no wins in those 9 games, achieved achieved 9 points out of a possible 42 to end the season. At a time when they needed to just pick up 1 or 2 wins from somewhere. And they were absolutely in games. We've covered this on previous episodes. Palace at home, 1-0, playing comfortable, really well.
That's the game. That's the game. I mean, if ever there was a defining moment in a season, I mean, we talked about it around the time as well, that really there was as it stands at that time, we were on 32 points. We were 12th in the table at that time, but that was the game that really I think has defined our season. That implosion, that sort of concession of a goal right at the fag end of the first half, and thereafter we've been shambolic.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the confidence really took a hit after that, and they never seemed to recover in terms of the confidence with which they had played with in some games early on this season. At least I remember the wins against kind of Bournemouth and Forest, and you thought, right, okay, this is an opportunity now to really kick on. Yeah, I think look, Leeds' race, I think you'll agree, was run last week. I think once Yerry Mina equalizes in the 99th minute, against Wolves at Molineux, and that what that did from a mathematical perspective, and we've covered it, but it ultimately took another result out of Leeds' favour because they no longer would survive with an Everton draw going into the last game of the season, or in that last game of the season against Bournemouth. And I think you had that on Saturday afternoon, and then you then had the absolute killer with Leicester also achieving a draw away to Newcastle, and all that simply did was it meant obviously Leicester gazumped them into 18th spot, and with the superior goal difference, it also meant that Leeds had to hope Leicester would drop points as well. And when you have multiple factors that need to go in your favour on the final day of the season, and you also have on paper the hardest game as well, with very little form to speak of, it's pretty much done and dusted. And to your point, conceding in the second minute of the first half, conceding pretty much in the second minute of the second half, conceding a couple of minutes after, bringing it back to 2-1. With a player that at least I've been impressed with this season, Jack Harrison. Yeah, it really was symptomatic of Leeds this season. If you look at the goals as well, arguably the most deadliest striker, perhaps at least one could argue definite level with Haaland in terms of his deadly finishing, although he's been doing it for a lot longer than even Erling Haaland. But Harry Kane, 15 yards out unopposed, he's scoring that 9 times out of 10, no two ways about it. You then look at his second goal to make it 3-1. Again, one-on-one with the goalkeeper. He rarely misses those type of kind of calm opportunities when he can pick a spot. Porro, again, decent finish. You could question the goalkeeper's positioning, but he's found the side netting. And then Lucas Moura, I mean,
that was
um,
I think if that summed up that. I mean, that was just it was comical defending. It was almost we sort of talked offline about it as well, that it was almost as if people were intentionally letting Moura go through. I mean, it was just some horrific attempts.
yeah. And the game was done by then, so I think the heads had dropped. But I mean, the goal is just ludicrous, right? You don't see that in the Premier League. That frequently, that type of defending where a man can just ghost through and pretty much shake hands with the goalkeeper before kind of slotting it back into the back of the net. But no, look, ultimately not good enough. I think it's deserved. I do think in the end, the 3 worst teams in the Premier League unfortunately got relegated. That is how the table works. After 38 games, you are who you are. I think from a Leeds perspective, just very quickly without doing a kind of complete post-mortem, I think there's a lot being made up. Obviously, the fact that they're on their 3rd manager this season with Sam Allardyce, it'll be interesting to see if he sticks around for the championship. But I just want to get your thoughts quickly before I perhaps touch on Leicester. There's been a lot made up of. Obviously, we had our record, let's say, managerial departures this season in the Premier League, and I don't buy too much into we should change a manager or we shouldn't change a manager. It's just important to have the right one. And it's important to have the right structure from top to bottom. And Leeds haven't had the right structure from ownership down. Sporting director, you're firing your sporting director Victor Orta at a time when actually it doesn't make that material a difference. 4 or 5 games to go. I mean, what does it matter? Yes, he may have had some falling out with the owner, but in the end, for me, it's a reactionary measure to try and appease fans. Again, that's not how I want my club to be run. But we saw West Ham stand pat, and they got themselves out of this situation. We saw Nottingham Forest stand pat with their coach, Steve Cooper, and he obviously guided them to relegation. Similarly, we saw some clubs make a tough decision. Crystal Palace removed Patrick Vieira from duties. Roy Hodgson comes back from retirement, guides them to safety. We saw the same with Aston Villa, guided them to more than just safety. Even Everton probably made the change early enough to give Sean Dyche enough games to work. And again, other clubs, Wolves as well. So we've seen a bit of a mishmash. Southampton got rid of 2 managers, still got relegated. Leicester got rid of a manager, got relegated. Leeds got rid of 2 managers, got relegated. So I don't buy too much into should you stick, should you twist. It's about just having the right man. And if you believe you've not got the right manager in place, fine, move on and get the right manager in place. But what's your view? Do you think that if the Leeds could or should they have stuck with Jesse Marsh, or was this pretty much inevitable, whichever way you looked at it?
It was one where I think, with hindsight, I think perhaps we would have had the best chance sticking with Jesse Marsh. I think there was too many changes because we were playing okay. I think with Jesse Marsh, it was we just couldn't win a game, but we sort of had moments. I mean, he'd spent the whole summer coaching the players to play a certain system. And I think it was confusing. I think Grazia came and sorted it okay. We had some results, but it was admittedly against the sides at the bottom. But it's looking back now. I'm sort of thinking if we were going to sack Marsh, it should have been done before the World Cup. That really is the time. But the problem was, or I say problem, we'd won against Liverpool, we'd won against Bournemouth, so it would have made it very difficult to understand sacking Marsh then. But really, if there was a time, that was the time. At the time, I agreed with the decision, but I only agreed with the decision because I thought at the time, I mean, I don't know why, because this board has done nothing but sort of behave in a manner which is so unprofessional, incompetent. But I thought that they had somebody lined up, which was what the noise was coming out. I mean, we had some quite big names bandied about, but they all said no. They all said no. They were all in clubs at the time, which is always difficult. If you're going for a manager who's already managing at that time, it's difficult to try and get them to break their contract. So that's the situation. We then went for Grazia. I initially thought, yeah, it's okay. There's a certain stability. In the end, Big Sam came, and I was disappointed with Sam, and I'll tell you the reason why. When he took the job on 4 games, so it's a very small sample size, so it's harsh to criticize Big Sam, but he knew that the games that mattered were the last 2 games. So the games really that he should have been preparing for West Ham and Tottenham. We get 6 points in a sense that would have been a guarantee that we could have stayed up. First result against Man City 2-1. Excellent. That's a real surprise. The second game 2-2. Now, I would say that we perhaps shaded it, so we should have won that. So really, I was thinking that he's done a miraculous job in the first 2 games. Actually, I was quite optimistic for the West Ham game. That's when he let me down. I was just sort of thinking that the games that really we were expecting nothing, you've done okay. So really, I'm sort of thinking you're 2 weeks into the job. Maybe you've had a little time to instill some of your ideas, your philosophies. The last 2 games were a shambles, absolute shambles.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be as harsh because anytime you're a club that's appointing a manager with 4 games to go on some sort of miraculous rescue mission, you already know you're onto a loser then, to be honest with you. So, I mean, 4 games is just not ample enough time. I mean, what I would say going into the final game, a game they had to win, and I can understand his approach, so I wouldn't be too harsh, but I would have thought a game you have to win. And I think he's tried to kind of control his way through to a win in the final game. Of course, the game plan goes out the window when you concede in the second minute. But I think it was quite a conservative team, if you ask me. I think he definitely could have had one of the more attacking-minded players opposite Harrison, perhaps. I think to have McKennie kind of playing wide right, as I saw it, didn't quite work out. I would have preferred perhaps an approach that went at Spurs a little bit more, but Spurs had plenty for Leeds in that final game. They should have also scored a few, but I think that's Leeds. I mean, I think they deserve to go down. To be honest, they've not been.
Yeah,
I
agree.
agree. They've not been, as tough as it is for me to say, they've just not been good enough. And when you needed to, it's as if like you could see the confidence just draining out of them. Great first 20 minutes against West Ham, take the lead, and then suddenly relinquishing that control. And they just haven't had that know-how, that nous, that confidence, that mentality to kind of stick together through difficult periods and simply not concede. Just when you need to go through a sticky period and just be like, listen, can we get out of this without conceding? They just conceded territory, opportunities, chances, and invariably goals, and conceded a whole bunch of goals at the end of it. I just want to touch on Leicester because you're right, Ayub. I do agree with your overall assessment. Leicester City is the interesting story here in a lot of ways. Last year they finished 8th, 17 points clear of relegation. In the 5 seasons before that, they finished 5th, 9th, 9th and 12th. So their lowest finish was 12th. And obviously the season before that, you've got arguably the greatest Premier League story in the history of the Premier League, them winning the title. In amongst all of that, they've won the FA Cup 2 years ago when they beat Chelsea, I believe, in the final with that Yuri Tielemans long distance stunner into the top corner. And you have to feel in some ways that having finished 8th last year, if you look at their recruitment in the summer, I mentioned this in one of the previous episodes, they lost Fofana, Wesley Fofana to Chelsea in a big money move, which was always going to happen. It was a point where he wasn't training with the team. It seemed like they were going to cash in, and they got some good money for him, let's be very clear. He's a player who's having some difficulties right now at Chelsea. So you'd say it's a good sale that of 80 million. But they only bought in Wout Faes last summer. So they pretty much said, well, we've lost a centre-back. We'll get a centre-back in, although I don't think Faes is at the level of Fofana. And in the end, I think they've then had to panic in January trying to get. I think they bought Christensen, Tete, and Suter, the Australian centre back. And I think there's a part of me that does feel like they took last season as well. We're a mid-table team, and we'll be okay. So there has been some sort of lackadaisical approach, let's say, to recruitment, perhaps, just kind of settling and thinking. And I do liken sometimes Premier League, especially in this day and age, to Formula One, which is that if you're not making kind of technological advancements to your car, kind of to your technical improvements, you're not necessarily standing still, you're going backwards, because now you've got clubs even kind of coming from kind of behind you, but really establishing themselves if they've got the right structure. Brentford's a fantastic example, right? A wonderful manager, good tactician, understands how his team plays, got a clear identity, but good stability off the field as well. You don't hear too much out of Brentford, Ivan Toney, bans aside. But it's just to say that I think Leicester, ever since obviously the unfortunate passing of the owner in that horrid helicopter crash, you've got the son then taking over. And yeah, again, you'd still see them as a mid-table team. They've done well. Like I said, they've won a trophy. They won 2 trophies, one a remarkable one. I don't think it'll ever be surpassed in terms of that achievement, at least not in the modern day Premier League, where big clubs rule. So that this year, I think it's just they've suffered because of a lack of recruitment. I think Brendan Rodgers, you could see that it wore on him over as the games kind of progressed. You saw him in post-game interviews, bereft of any kind of real joy or kind of enthusiasm. So I think he represented a little bit of how his team was playing at the time, not being able to get a tune out of them. And slowly but surely, they then obviously made the change to Dean Smith. It seemed inevitable that it was going to happen. Dean Smith, I think he got some decent results, but again, giving a manager a couple of games, one that's still not experienced, I would say, at this highest level. Dean Smith, I know he's had a couple of runs with Norwich and Aston Villa previously, but it's not a Roy Hodgson or somebody who's been there, done it. So I think it was always a difficult gig. I wouldn't put too much on him. I think he's managed to get a few results. I think their approach, there was a lot made of their approach against Newcastle. I've been speaking to a few friends and family. Now, it's one of those, the end justifies the means. So second to last game of the season, they went in fully defensive against Newcastle. And yes, they should have lost that game. And if you play that game another 10 times, you'll probably lose 10 times. But they miraculously came for a draw and got a draw. And I think the idea was always, and this is the point I was trying to make to some of our friends, suggesting that their approach actually worked, because their idea was go to Newcastle, somehow get a draw at a ground that not many are picking up points at, St James's Park, a game that meant so much to Newcastle because they wanted to obviously clinch Champions League football that day as well. And they got hammered for the best part, let's be very clear. But they came for a draw. They somehow miraculously got a draw, and then the idea was to win your last game. So they kind of fulfilled their side of the bargain. The idea was always to put pressure on Everton to win that final game, which they had to. And to be fair, I watched the full 90 minutes, or 100 minutes actually in the end, and it was a tight game. I think Everton had some of the slightly better chances, but the game comes down to moments, and regardless of the deflection, there was a big moment from Decore. So I think Leicester it'll be interesting to see how they are in the Championship, because to your point, they will lose, you mentioned some of the players, but they will lose James Maddison, they will lose Harvey Barnes, and Tielemans, I think, is on a free transfer anyway. So they're going to lose some real talent, but you'd think with some of the infrastructure that they have, with a little bit of retooling, and it's a good job, you'd think, that they can make a real fist of it in the Championship. But yeah, I think they'll kick themselves in terms of they had definitely the most dramatic fall. Even Southampton have been skirting relegation last couple of seasons. I think Leicester will really feel like, where did this come from? And yeah, can they come back? Perhaps. But I think that's the overall shock when you look at the totality of the Premier League season.
Yeah, absolutely right. I agree. I think Leicester fans, as I alluded to before, they will be devastated because, as you pointed out, the last 4 or 5 seasons, it's I suppose it never enters their equation that they're even going to be skirting with relegation. So to be in the dogfight and to actually end up getting relegated. And there's an interesting fact that my son actually sort of said to me earlier, that the last time that Leeds got relegated, Leicester were also relegated. So there's a bit of a coincidence, but they did get back up a lot earlier than we did. So at least I suppose they've got that to think of. But that now is the point, because they will lose players. I presume they'll get good money for these players. I mean, I'm not sure what the contracts are, but I presume they'll get decent money. So, I mean, and this is a Premier League show, so I don't want to talk too much about the Championship. But the Championship next year, if you look at the teams, my goodness me, that is a tough league to get out of. If you look at the teams, there is so much quality, or so many teams with a history, a rich history. So it is not going to be an easy league. I think it's one of these where for Leicester, for Southampton, for us, we've got to capitalise on the parachute payment. We've got to, I mean, for us as Leeds fans, I think at the moment what we're concerned about is it's a club in flux. We're not sure what the 49ers plans are. The Rads is trying to buy Sampdoria. I think the last report I had that they rejected is, I don't know whether it's an initial offer. So until he sorts that out, is that when he's going to try and sort of sell to the 49ers? I have no idea. We need to get a manager in. We need to get a manager in ASAP. It has to be. I mean, I was saying to somebody about what would be my strategy. My strategy is simple. I think the biggest club in the Championship is Leeds United. So we should be making sure we get the best coach. We should be whoever the best striker is in this Championship, we should be going for him. Whoever the best midfielder is, we should be going for him. Whoever the best defender is, we should be going for him. So 3 positions, the spine, we should be going for the best players. But it's going to be a very, very tough season with Leicester as well. Like you said, Leicester, they're in a good position. They're still a very attractive club. In fact, they are a very attractive club. Same with Southampton. Southampton have started very early. They've got Russell Martin in, so at least they've got a coach in place. I'm not sure about Dean Smith, whether he's going to be coach of Leicester for next season or whether he was just appointed for the for this season.
Yeah, he commented that he will see if the job is offered to him. So you're right; it's in a state of flux at Leicester City. To your point about Southampton, Russell Martin, they've already appointed him. So yeah, they've been kind of quick and decisive, let's say, in taking steps. They are going to lose some key players. Alcaraz will probably move on. James Ward-Prowse talk that he will also perhaps look to move on. I think Lavia in the middle of the park as well.
So he'll definitely go. He'll definitely go. He's a hot prospect.
He is. So they're going to lose a few players. But you're right, some of these clubs, I mean, Southampton, Leicester, even Leeds, you'd think they'll make a strong fist of it in terms of trying to get back up at the first time of asking. And talking of which, we should congratulate, obviously, Burnley got promoted many weeks ago. They've got promoted with games to spare. Sheffield United obviously solidified second place. And getting promoted to the Premier League, and obviously Luton Town beating Coventry on penalties. A rough way to lose, but I guess an incredibly ecstatic way to win and to clinch your ticket to the big time. Luton, I mean, that's probably a banker for the first televised game of the season. You would imagine Sky Sports will be all over that. A home game,
and they'll
for
be
Luton
down.
Town.
I mean, I was talking about the Championship being probably the hardest it's ever been. I think the Premier League, I mean, you're looking at Sheffield United, you're looking at probably Luton. I think I think there's only one relegation spot really that's going to be fought for, and that's that.
We may have
two are down.
Well, we may have a Luton Town supporting fan watching this episode, and I've given them the big, listen, it's going to be the first game televised live on Sky. And your first words were, but they're down. So
they'll be down. I mean, I can't see them. They're just not going to have the pull. I mean, it's a great story. It's a really nice romantic story, but I just think they're an embarrassment to the Premier League.
Behave.
They are an embarrassment.
I'm going to have to edit that out. Right. Okay. Right. Okay. Good. I mean, I think Yes, I think we've covered that topic. I mean, that was probably the most important thing, to be fair, on the final day of the season. Brighton had already clinched European football. Aston Villa on the last day clinched Europa Conference League. I think that was the only other kind of outstanding issue to address, let's say, in the final day. But anyway, Ayub, good to see you in your Leeds kit. I'm glad to see you smiling. And this is perhaps the last we'll ever speak of Leeds. Anyway, for the next 12 months.
Yes.
Let's see. Right, just switching gears a little, not completely. We wanted to cover just a kind of a initial reaction to the Premier League season 2022-2023, unique season in a lot of ways. But I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, and we'll get plenty of opportunity to kind of really digest the season in a lot more detail, whilst also looking ahead to what shapes up to be a very interesting Premier League campaign next year. But what's your own subjective kind of memorable highlights, moments of this past Premier League season, and maybe even further afield, this last kind of season of football?
I mean, it's not a particular specific moment. It's an accumulation. I mean, I think what stood out for me is Manchester City, because it their persistence. I mean, they were just not going to give Arsenal. I mean, even though there was a gap, it was almost as if they just felt it was their destiny, that they were waiting for a moment to slip up. And it really was, for me, a reflection of a great champion team, that they they were on the coattails. They were waiting for a moment. It's almost right. We're going to wait. There's going to be a moment when you slip up, and when you slip up, we're going to go in for the kill. And it sort of, it's a side that I consider to be one of the best club sides ever. How they performed at that key moment when there was that slip, because that's really, for me, the absolute epitome of a champion. That what you do is you wait, you wait, you wait. It's almost like an athlete on a long distance race. You wait and wait and wait. You get the opportunity, and bang, you just beat the man. And that's what they did. And that I found outstanding. It's not the Premier League, but I still want to sort of focus on Manchester City. And the moment for me, or the game for me, that just stood out was Real Madrid versus Manchester City. It was an absolute delight. It really was. And I sort of made the point when we did our show around that time, that if you're a Leeds fan, you're always constantly having to watch rubbish. So to be then uh, sort of shown a game, or to witness a game of such high caliber, high quality, two teams at the top of the game, which is unusual. As I said, they're usually, even when you've got two heavyweights, one team perhaps dominates, but it was almost blow for blow. It was Madrid had a moment, and Man City had a moment, and it was just a wonderful game. And for me, it really showed me what high class, top quality football was all about. And I loved that game. It was a game that I'll remember for a long, long time. I think what City have done this season perhaps surpasses what they've done in the past, because it was a real indication, a reflection of the steel and the fight that they have, and this never say die attitude. In a sense, it's a case of, we've been there, we've done it, and we know how to do it, which was obviously different to what Arsenal sort of faced, because they'd never done it, and it showed.
Yeah, and just for our viewers, are you referring to the first leg at the Bernabeu when they
Oh
were going
yes,
for blow
yes.
for blow? Obviously, the second game was Manchester City putting on an absolute clinic, sealing their spot in the Champions League final. And look, I think this season, if they, especially with the two games that they have remaining this season, I think the context in which you speak about them, Ayub, is on that kind of mass scale. You're not talking just kind of on a micro scale, whether they, in terms of winning a game here and there. What you're talking about is their excellence, their consistent excellence, and kind of this mentality that they have, that they smelt blood, and they didn't relent and give Arsenal an inch psychologically in terms of that title race. And you see that in some of the other competitions as well. And now it's up to them to kind of seal their place in history in a lot of ways. Not saying that they haven't done so already, but to your point, you're talking about them in terms of, going down as one of the greatest club sides ever, at least at this country. has ever seen. So I kind of hear you loud and clear. Yeah, no disputing that whatsoever. For me, there's a number of kind of key memories, and I would like to kind of just get your thoughts, and please chime in where you want. For me, firstly, just as an Arsenal fan, of course, it would be remiss for me not to start there, and I want to be very objective. As a supporter of, I guess, football and of many sports, I'm big on kind of process. I'm big on kind of achieving results through kind of this organized decision making and understanding that what we're trying to achieve. I think one of the great compliments I have to give Mikel Arteta is that he's finally got to a point where he's connected the club to the fans. You see that when they go a goal down, the fans are fully behind them. It's what you want to see, because adversity is going to come in sports, in football, especially when you're going for big top honors, when you haven't been in that race or been in that kind of environment before. And I think he's just created a wonderful, his personality, his spirit, at least for me, he speaks well. He wants to fight. He wants to fight with Man City. I like that. He understands what's going to be needed to go again next season, and that means that you have to start from scratch again. And I think there's only one thing worse. I think about this often. There's only one thing worse than losing, I think, in sports. And they are kind of interlinked, but it's irrelevance. And Arsenal, for many years, were relevant. And that's me as an Arsenal fan speaking. So the fact that they were relevant in terms of the kind of final stretch of the season, being the marquee televised game, going to the Etihad, and yes, they got absolutely spanked, but being talked about, will they, won't they, can they see this through, do they have the mentality, will Man City chase them down? Arsenal haven't been part of that conversation for the best part of 2 decades. So first comes relevance. So I'm just grateful for the fact that my club's relevant, or at least has been for one season. So I think when you're not even spoken about, when you're just mid-table mediocrity or just above average, let's say, which Arsenal have been for many of those seasons, post some of those kind of Wenger triumphant years, I just appreciate the fact that the club's relevant again. And I think there's something to be said about that. And now I'm not saying they're winners, and I'm not saying that should count for something. I'm just saying it starts there, that you start becoming part of the conversation of big clubs again, and you start behaving like a big club, which I think they'll also try and go again in the summer transfer window. So I think I think they're going to go for it. They're going to go after it in terms of trying to overcome this unbelievable Manchester City team. And I think there's something to be said about that. So I think there's a massive credit to not just Arteta, but the entire club in terms of how they've turned it around. They've backed him, they've supported him. But clearly that's a club right now that's well connected on the whole, which is what you need. If you want to achieve big things, you need that club from top to bottom. We've spoken many times about Leeds. You saw some of the Leeds faithful at Ellen Road throughout the game. It made for an eerie atmosphere. And that's something that hopefully they can overcome, but that's something that Arsenal currently have. So hopefully they'll go again. A couple of other kind of notable highlights for me is the World Cup. It was the first Premier League season where we had a World Cup punctuated in the middle of the season, where we had a pause. Obviously played in our winter, mid-November to mid-December. Obviously England played in a Muslim host country, which obviously is important to you and I. In Qatar, there was a lot of talk beforehand, obviously a lot of talk during the tournament about some of the controversies involved with regards to Qatar hosting that tournament. But we have friends and family, and other notable accounts at least talk about how it was so I've got friends and family who attended a lot of the games there, and they speak about how it was a very pleasurable fan experience, a fantastic tournament. Obviously all the stadiums were in close proximity, but the overall fan experience, which is what it's about on the whole, was a positive one. An unbelievable final in the end, lots of drama. Some of the highlights for me will be Virgil van Dijk body checking Leandro Paredes when he fouled, I think, Nathan Ake, and then kicked the ball towards the Dutch bench, and he just comes in and body checks him and sends him into next week. That's an iconic image. I'd ask anyone to find that. But no, look, the World Cup always throws these big moments, right? England against France, quarterfinal. Unfortunately, England couldn't get through. So yeah, the World Cup's always a big event. It gets the world's eyeballs on it. So for me, just having that middle of the season added a different experience, let's say, to the overall football experience. And then coming back to the Premier League a little bit, is we had some great moments this Premier League, and I'm just going to quickly rattle some off, and some of them will make you chuckle. You think about second weekend of the season, Spurs against Chelsea. Chelsea played unbelievable football in the first half of that game. I'd again encourage anyone to go watch it. It was some unbelievable football. You can't think Chelsea playing great football this season, but it really was. And it ends in a injury time equalizer from Harry Kane, if you remember the famous handshake between, or the infamous handshake between Thomas Tuchel and Antonio Conte.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, two managers who then had another manager replace them, who've then been replaced themselves. So it just goes to show how long ago it was. But no, I mean that handshake at the end and there's fisticuffs and what have you. It's what we love.
That's what I love.
Yeah,
I love all of that.
it's a bit of
I love,
drama.
love a good kickoff.
It's a bit of drama, but you mentioned it. Obviously, Haaland coming into the Premier League, breaking all type of records. I think when he scored the hat trick against Manchester United, that was his third consecutive Premier League home hat trick. 36 Premier League goals. Harry Kane got 30 in the end, but 36 Premier League goals, breaking Andy Cole and Shearer's record for the most goals in a Premier League campaign. How many goals will he score? How quickly can he get to 100? He's going to break that record if he stays long enough in terms of the fastest to 100. That's without a shadow of a doubt. But yeah, some late goal winners. You think about, again, I mentioned Kane against Chelsea. Reece Nelson, 97th minute winner, home to Bournemouth. That was famous. Jota scoring 4-3 after Spurs kind of came back at Anfield. Klopp pulling his hamstring on the touchline. Fabio Carvalho scoring an injury time winner at Anfield to beat Newcastle. And then Ivan Toney at the Etihad. How can we forget, giving Brentford 3 points at the Etihad Stadium, and then just with the last game of the season, they did the double over the champions, beating them at home as well. One final point.
How can you forget Somerville against Liverpool at Anfield?
Yes, I was into it.
How can you forget that? I mean, that was one of our rare sort of high points.
Absolutely, it was. It wasn't quite an injury time, but I take your point. It was a winner at Anfield. I think it may have been Liverpool's only defeat at Anfield this season.
Yeah.
So you can take that to the Championship, see what it's worth. So that's good. The only final point I would say, and I think it's more of a slightly larger point. I think as much as England have had some opportunities to win major honours, Euro final played in 2021 against Italy, lose on penalties. World Cup semi-final against Croatia, should have made it through to play France in the final. Even this year in Qatar, for large periods of that game, they were better than France. And France, don't forget, had a few important players missing in the tournament as well. Kante, Benzema, just to name a few. And I just think to myself that as much as England have had opportunities and are knocking on the door, let's say, you have to think about this season in the Premier League and think about how many stars have, let's say, come to real good form, and it would suggest that the England future is still bright. And normally cycles operate only, let's say, 2 or 3 tournaments at a time, right? But England, you could argue, have this opportunity to extend. If you look at the front line, you've got Harry Kane scoring 30 Premier League goals. He's still good for another 2 seasons. He's at the back end of his peak, but still in his peak. Bukayo Saka had another great season. He made it into our team of the season, but you would think he's only going to get better given his tender age. Rashford had a fantastic recovery season after a really difficult year. The year before, Ten Hag's clearly getting a tune out of him. Then Grealish, you mentioned him as your most improved player. Ayub, he had a fantastic season. He belongs on that Manchester City pitch. He will play, I would imagine, in the FA Cup final, and he absolutely will start in the Champions League final. So it just goes to show his redemption story. And these are all kind of players who still will play a huge part for England in the future. Declan Rice, definitely moving on to pastures new this summer, but again, really established himself as a really good quality defensive midfielder, or a number 8, you could argue. But Bayern Munich in for him, Arsenal obviously in the race, Chelsea, Manchester United, all kind of in for him. So Jude Bellingham about to perhaps secure a big move to Real Madrid. He wasn't available obviously in Saturday's game, which Dortmund needed him, where they obviously missed out on the Bundesliga. But you think about that team, and with others obviously in the back as well, Reece James, Trent Alexander-Arnold coming into a bit of form for Liverpool at the back end. So
Ben White, I'm a massive fan of Ben White.
Ben White, even the young lad at Brighton who's on loan, I think, but Chelsea have a buyback option. Colville is it? I think that's his name. So there's a lot of things for England as well, in a sense, to be excited about in terms of the future. And that's not always the case. Normally there are these cycles and a team comes to its natural end. But I think Southgate, if he does stick around, has a great opportunity, even still, for the next 2 or 3 tournaments. Phil Foden, we've not even mentioned. He's another great talent. So I think that would be my kind of observation from an England perspective with regards to those players, especially the improvement that a lot of them have made this season. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I've forgotten about that actually. You now that you mention it, the World Cup, there was lots of concerns for all sorts of reasons. There was lots of politicizing of the World Cup, and there were lots of people sort of questioning whether Qatar should have the right. The fact that it was in mid-season, there were so many issues they had to face, and I think it was one of my favorite World Cups. I think it was fantastic. It was run incredibly well. I'm extremely, and I still will be always critical of the BBC. I mean, I'm not a fan of the BBC, but I think they didn't show the opening ceremony, or at least it was on iPlayer, so nobody knew. Uh, and and under all of that pressure, you'd almost, I think there were so many people wanting the World Cup to fail, but they did an amazing job. I think everybody that turned up, I mean, this alcohol ban that people were talking about, it was almost as if it's something that you need. You don't need that. If you've got, I mean, everybody that was spoken to who was honest said it was one of the most amazing World Cups. All the commentators, or at least a large number of commentators who were there as well, talked about. I mean, Rio Ferdinand was wonderful. He really did articulate beautifully about how wonderful the experience was. So it's now that you mentioned the World Cup, that was certainly a highlight. Even though it's not about the Premier League, but the fact it was just one of these sensational tournaments and a fitting finale as well. I mean, that's why I was so delighted that the final fitted, I suppose, the whole way the tournament had gone, that it was wonderful. It was a great crowd experience. It was a wonderful tournament. I mean, and it was a unique World Cup because it was so, you very rarely get stadiums so close to each other. I mean, we obviously know sort of people who went, and everybody who went just cannot sort of praise it highly enough. So yes, you're absolutely right. I think it was a wonderful sort of interjection into the season, but I think it was something that was beautifully executed by the Qataris, and good luck to them. I mean, as I said, I was one of them as well, one of those dissenting voices, but more because it was breaking the season up. Nothing to do with the fact that it's Qatar and human rights, all of these cobblers, suddenly all these sanctimonious positions that people were taking, that they don't allow this, they don't allow that. Sod that. At the end of the day, it was a country that was perfectly within their own right to have their own rules, regulations, and they did cut some slack. I mean, I think people should be aware they did cut some slack, but fantastic event, and yes, one of the highlights of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great tournament, and to your point, yeah, absolute fitting finale with that final contested between France and Argentina, which I'm sure we'll probably get into in our summer episodes when we reflect back on what was a great season. I think we should wrap it up there. I think you've coped very well. I must say, a brave face and all that. You've obviously got a lot of experience in your years about the kind of doom and gloom, but also the kind of the highs and lows of what football can bring. So,
I've
although
been here before. I've been here before, but I actually,
unfortunately,
it's we're in a better position. I mean, 2004, I was there at the last game at the Bridge, but we were already down, so it wasn't a game that defined our destiny. But then I knew that it was probably going to be a long time because we had this financial situation which was going to really make it difficult. This year, I'm hoping that the finances are pretty sturdy, pretty solid, but it's going to be a tough gig. It's going to be a really tough gig, but the show must go on. We're no longer in the Premier League, but we're in the best league in the world. And
indeed.
hopefully Bamford will not be part of Leeds United. I had to mention him because I just realised I've not mentioned him this show.
Well, let's hope, like I said, let's hope the season ends with Erling Haaland from Leeds getting his player of the
Yes.
year. I think he's already got one, and hopefully he can end it with the other individual award as well. So no, good stuff. We'll wrap up there for today. So this episode, hopefully, so we're recording on Tuesday evening. So hopefully that this episode should be with our viewers on Wednesday. We shall hopefully be also be recording on Thursday for an episode drop on Friday. Again, previewing the big game at Wembley on Saturday afternoon, the Manchester Derby, the FA Cup final. Manchester United going for their second trophy of the year. Manchester City also going for their second trophy of the season as they chase the treble not done in this country since 1999. So Manchester United have plenty of motivation to thwart Manchester City on Saturday. Hopefully Badge will be with us for the next episode. So that'll be us for the next episode. Again, if you haven't done so already, please give the channel a subscribe. Your support is appreciated. Give the episode a like, share, drop a comment. Will Leeds be back at the first time of asking? What about Leicester? What about Southampton? Who do you see as the next manager for Leeds, on the basis that Sam Allardyce probably will perhaps move on? So yeah,
he can sling his hook. We don't want him.
So yeah, looking forward to receiving as much feedback as possible. But yeah, hopefully we'll see you on the next episode. Until then, see you then.